The world stands on the brink of catastrophe right now. The authorities of the largest Persian Gulf countries are convinced a new, full-scale attack by Israel on Iran is practically inevitable. And what is currently happening behind the scenes of diplomacy and under the cover of night at missile factories could shock anyone. We are not just talking about another shelling. We are talking about a conflict that could overturn the entire Middle East and draw in world superpowers. You must watch this video until the end, because in the final segment, I will voice my personal, perhaps shocking, but very important thought on this situation. But for now, buckle up, because the situation is escalating to the limit, and we are beginning. Tensions between Jerusalem and Tehran have reached a critical point, and confidence is growing in the Persian Gulf region, confirmed by officials and analysts, that Israel is actively preparing for a new, much larger military operation against Iran. Sources cited by the authoritative publication The New York Times say that for Israel, the Iranian nuclear program poses a threat that they are no longer willing to tolerate. You see, the situation changed radically in just 1 month. The deadline for the so-called 2015 nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, which previously strictly limited the development of Iran's program and served as some guarantee of containment, has simply expired. And what do we see immediately after this? The US and its allies immediately ramped up sanctions against Iran. Negotiations for a new deal have reached a stalemate, effectively failing completely. Now, Tehran, as they say, has broken loose, and according to the president of Iran, he has promised to restore all nuclear facilities in the country with even greater force. This is a statement that cannot be ignored. And this is where the shocking information emerges, the one that is forcing global analysts to sound the alarm. Iranian authorities claim that they have allegedly destroyed all their stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. But Israeli intelligence, in turn, states the exact opposite. Their data indicates that these stockpiles were not destroyed, but were urgently moved to a certain safe place, which is obviously awaiting its hour. If Israeli intelligence is right, it means Iran may have much more potentially dangerous material in its arsenal than they declare. And this directly threatens the security of the entire region, not just Israel. But nuclear weapons are only one side of the coin. Iran's military potential is growing at a terrifying speed. Ali Vaez, head of the Iran project at the International Crisis Group, provided data that makes the blood run cold. He claims that Iranian missile factories are currently operating around the clock, and they have a specific plan, a specific combat objective. According to him, the Iranian military hopes to launch 2,000 missiles simultaneously to break through Israeli defenses. Not 500 over 12 days, as was the case in June. 2,000 missiles simultaneously. Let that number sink in. This is not an escalation. It is a declaration of readiness for total war. This is an order of magnitude higher than what we saw just a few months ago. And here we cannot fail to recall what has already happened. The military conflict between Iran and Israel is not a theory. It is already a fact, the active phase of which took place in June of this year. On the night of June 13th, the Israeli army, the IDF, carried out a preemptive airstrike on Iranian facilities. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu then stated that these facilities were directly connected with the production of nuclear and missile weapons. Iran immediately retaliated with a massive shelling of Israeli cities using missiles and drones. At the time, it seemed like a shock. Now, against the backdrop of preparation for 2,000 missiles, it seems only like a prelude. The situation became so heated that even the United States, was forced to intervene, and to intervene openly and with force. In late June, U.S. forces struck 3 Iranian nuclear facilities located in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, thereby showing that the U.S. would not stand aside if the conflict went beyond a bilateral confrontation. 2 days later, after U.S. intervention, the parties announced a ceasefire, ending the hottest phase of the fighting. But as we can see, this was only a temporary lull before a new storm. And now, the region is preparing for the fact that Israel, according to the Gulf countries, will no longer limit itself to preemptive strikes and is planning a more decisive operation. The stakes are rising. Iranian factories are working non-stop, and nuclear stockpiles may be hidden and awaiting their moment. This is a critical moment. If you consider this information important and want to follow the development of this catastrophic situation with us, please click the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update when we analyze the details. A new conflict, threatening to crash oil prices, shake global markets, and draw in global players, is literally at the door. All eyes are on Tehran and Jerusalem, and the world is holding its breath. We will pause here for now. And here we come to the very point I promised to discuss at the beginning of this broadcast. This is my personal point of view, my opinion, which I think is capable of turning your perception of this conflict upside down. You know, the most shocking thing about this news is not that Iran is increasing missile production, nor is it that Israel is preparing for a new attack. The most terrifying thing is the cynicism with which this conflict is being prepared. This is not a sudden outburst of anger. It is not an accident. It is an absolutely, frighteningly predictable scenario. My main point is that the world is not trying to stop this war. It is preparing to survive it. Think about it. The nuclear deal expired. All key players, from Washington to Moscow, knew the exact date this would happen. They knew that with the death of the JCPOA, Iran would feel free, and Israel would feel mortally vulnerable. This crisis was scheduled. But instead of throwing all their efforts in recent months and weeks into an emergency extension of the agreement, or at least a replacement, what did we see? We only saw tightening sanctions and a diplomatic deadlock. And this is where the real horror begins. For Netanyahu, eliminating the nuclear threat now, while Iran is isolated, is not only a matter of national security, but let's be honest, a powerful political move. For Iran's leadership, demonstrating the readiness to launch 2,000 missiles simultaneously is a way to show its strength to both internal dissidents and external enemies after the failure of negotiations and increased pressure. In other words, both Tehran and Jerusalem have internal political incentives for escalation. This is not just a war over resources or territory. It is a war fueled by domestic political needs. When we look at the June conflict, which ended with U.S. intervention and a ceasefire, we see only a temporary pause. Now, when Tehran is preparing to launch 2,000 missiles, it is essentially saying, next time, intervention will cost you much more. And these are not just empty words. This is a turning point where a regional conflict that the global community could control moves into a phase that will be impossible to stop with a single phone call. My shocking opinion, and I insist on this, global powers, including the United States, have already run this scenario in their headquarters. They are not looking for how to avoid this war. They are calculating how to minimize their losses, how to protect oil routes, and how to maintain influence when the Middle East plunges into chaos. We stand on the threshold of what could be the largest military confrontation in the region in decades. And it is happening not because diplomacy suddenly failed, but because it was consciously allowed to drift. This makes the world an incredibly dangerous and, even worse, frighteningly indifferent place. Therefore, while politicians and generals play their deadly game of chess, we can only monitor their every step. Monitor and demand answers from our governments as to why this catastrophe was made possible. With this, our news report, where we do not draw conclusions but merely record reality, comes to a close. Stay with us.